So, very good afternoon, everybody. I just want to say that this is the first silent disco presentation I have ever made in my life, so it feels kind of strange. I'm also probably the oldest person in this breakout area, so to help with my age, I'll have, because we've all got headphones, I'm going to do this, and how do you do this again, the sign? Oh, that's right, yeah, like this. But no, I won't do that because you'll all think I'm having a midlife crisis, which I'm not. All right, so just to introduce myself, my name is Stephen Yeo, I'm a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Marketing. I was also Marketing Executive of the Year for Marketo in 2017, and I was also European Marketing Director for Panasonic B2B. For 10 years, although I left them actually last month and I'm on my way to my next job. But I am, in terms of as a Marketo customer, I've worked with Marketo now for 8 years and we've pretty much done everything with it, bent it, tweaked it, love it. And so today I'm going to share with you about how you can use Marketo to help you manage GDPR with a sensible workload and also to protect your customers. So the agenda will be that I'm going to talk about the risks and rewards of data stewardship and good data stewardship and also bad data stewardship. And then I'm going to talk about how you can deliver good data stewardship and GDPR compliance with Marketo, because it's a really, really good tool to manage your GDPR programs. I'm going to talk, first of all, about legitimate interest campaigns, and the main bulk of the presentation will be about data retention policy and how to manage that. And I'm going to show you how complicated that's going to be and how you can solve it. So now, the first question, we don't have the social media app, but I'd just like to show of hands. First of all, how many of you are Marketo customers? Oh, wow. Okay, that's considerable. Well, can I say, lovely to see all of you, and also lovely to have also the Marketo folks here as well. I'm very excited about some of the things I'm hearing, and certainly the last presentation about the roadmap of the two companies coming together. Now, the other thing is, so how many of you were involved with GDPR? Yeah, okay. How many of you think that your workload peaked on the 24th of May, 2018? Okay, right. I'm seeing 5 hands. Because what I'm going to show you is actually, I think that the bulk of the workload is now. And I'll show you why. So first of all, let's talk about data stewardship. So the data stewardship is a big, big deal. And you heard, I'm sure you've heard all about the WhatsApp issue that came out this week where WhatsApp was hacked. But these, I'm from the UK, but these are some of the names that have hit the UK press and the global press over the last 2 years. And according to IBM, the average cost of a data breach in the UK is almost 3.7 million euros if you include all the time and the potential fines and basically people running around trying to solve an issue. And this is only going to get bigger. This is an example of a company which I was actually a customer of, TalkTalk. They're an ISP in the UK, one of the big ISPs. They actually lost a huge number of customer records, and it was they had an outsourced call center in India, and somebody took a USB key with the customer file of TalkTalk. And about 2.5 years ago, I started to get these calls, malicious calls about saying, we're from the TalkTalk call center and we need to access your PC to fix your router. We've seen an issue. And I'm like going, yeah, sure. I actually once asked them, does your mom and dad know what you're actually doing? And they hung up on me. But what happened was, you can see, this is the share price of TalkTalk is red, and the blue is the share price of the ISP industry, the telecoms industry, and you can see how they diverged after that event. This is a really big deal. It's only going to get worse. On the other hand, good data stewardship, I think, is a very strong signal to your customer about respect and trust between you and your customers. This is an example from MasterCard, and I think MasterCard are setting a very good precedent here, that they have got, on their website, they've got a thing called My Data. And what they've done is, as a customer, you can go and look. They've kind of automated the data inquiry process of their audience so that you can go and see all the data they have on you, you can make requests, and it's a very transparent, automated and professional system, and I think this is the future. So let's now move on to the bulk of the presentation, which is how can you use Marketo to reduce the marketing's workload, create a great customer experience, and ensure you're GDPR compliant. I actually call this compliance automation, this subject. So what I'm going to show you, the first part is, don't forget, how many of you are in B2B marketing? How many in B2C marketing? Okay, oh wow, I wasn't expecting that. These rules are for B2B, although the data retention policy that I'm going to come on to is for B2C, but these next slides on legitimate interest are B2B only. So B2B rules for GDPR are less strict than B2C. Basically, they consider that if you have companies of 2 or more people, that they're legally considered companies, and you can you can contact those people electronically without permission, although if they've opted out you can't, but without permission if they fall under this thing called legitimate interest. What does legitimate interest mean? Legitimate interest is if your message, if your product offering or service offering is relevant or potentially useful to those people because of their job title or because of the industry that they work in. So for example, from Panasonic, you'll see security cameras will probably be interesting to the security manager. A projector could be interesting to the audiovisual manager of a business, etc. Now, how do you automate and build legitimate interest into your Marketo instance to make it really easy for your team? Well, the first place that you start is look at your existing data. I'm sure that all of you have been collecting leads for many years in your systems, and what you'll see is that you'll be able to get on the left there, you've got job titles. They're in different languages in Europe, but you'll see the job titles and the number of leads that have come in, and you can attribute those to the different product categories in your business. So this was from Panasonic. You'll see we could link the job titles that had an affinity to computers. We had job titles linked to scanners. And of course, behind that data was also an industry. So we did data enrichment where we could look at the SIC codes that behind this that were also interested in those products. So the point is, in your business, you probably already have the data to start with legitimate interest and take the guesswork out of it. So how campaigns are normally built in Marketo and most marketing automation packages, you start off with a contact database, you select an audience, you build your artwork, build the logic, and then you execute the campaign, and hopefully, bingo, that the results come in. But it means that for legitimate interest, every single time you run a campaign, you have to build by hand the audience list selection. You have to create the rules to say, I want this type of industry or this type of job title, etc. And that can be prone to error, and sometimes your staff may not know the associations of genuine legitimate interest between a job title industry and what you're trying to achieve. So the better way to do it is imagine that you could have a predefined segment within your marketing automation system which was predefined once and then could be used for any campaign that you do. And you could almost have a library of these segments which you can then say that segment is for legitimate interest security cameras, and your marketing staff don't even have to build it. It's just there, they can pick it up and they can use it. So they're part, and they exist and they're part of the database and they can be reused many times. Well, guess what? Marketo has this feature in segments pre-built in, and it's really, really useful to help manage legitimate interest under GDPR. This is an example of a segment definition. So you'll see that, for example, it says company type is end user because we were working with channel as well, so we wanted to have end user customers and not channel partners. The job title contains technical manager, and the SIC code, the industry, is 8221, which is higher education, university and colleges. Basically, you define that once, and hey, bingo, you've got your legitimate interest there for a certain product. Now, the useful thing about this is that those segments are working all the time. So they're listening campaigns, so you've got data changing all the time within your Marketo database, and those segments are going to be able to constantly pick out the person in the crowd that qualifies for legitimate interest under GDPR. So all that work is done for you. The segment is always working in the background. Some practical considerations: Marketo can't do all the work for you, but it's important, for example, that you set mandatory rules for your staff so that, first of all, marketing staff should always upload the data into your marketing automation system. Do not leave it to sales or admins, because this has legal connotations and quality connotations. So mandatory job descriptions, you can't do legitimate interest without job descriptions, and also ideally SIC codes. We used to run the Marketo database against industry references like Dun & Bradstreet and other databases twice a year, and we used to enrich the data with things like SIC codes and more. Now, I'm moving on now to the bulk of the presentation, and this is: how do you manage the data retention policy under GDPR? And this is a really big deal. The law says that you should only keep data for the minimum, or actually, yeah, I'm going to say the minimum time necessary for that data processing purpose. I've actually seen some data policies online for some major companies, and basically they say, we can keep your data until you tell us not to. Well, I'm sorry, but that's against the law. If somebody, for example, enters a competition, you are not allowed to I would not advise keeping that information for more than a year. So be very careful about the laws, very clear. You should only store data for the shortest time possible. So what you need, so imagine, the figures are from the Panasonic B2B database for Europe. So we had almost 300,000 people. We started off with 50, but it was growing at 40,000 people a year. And every single one of those people they were participating in promotions, attending trade shows, calling in, registering products for warranty. So each contact had multiple reasons of why they were sitting in our contact database. So it's like trying to hit a moving target. So how do you do that? So this is what you do. The steps in automating the data retention policy. If you went to, is anybody here from a very, very large, expensive consulting company? Excellent. Oh, sorry. Okay, what I'm going to present to you will cost you probably tens of thousands, maybe over £100,000. You're going to get it free today. It took us over a year to work this out, some very good people. So first of all, you create your data retention policy. That's the easy bit. But then you create this database with a single contact record. That was mentioned this morning in the Adobe section. And then what you do is you set up traps where whenever your contact X does something or changes in the database, you set the new data deletion date. I'll show you that. And then finally, you do a regular data deletion run so that typically every year or maybe every half year, you'll go through your database to purge it for people who have now are outside the data retention policy. So first of all, to create the data retention policy, this was something which, this was from Panasonic. So we had, what we did, you'll see, we had on the top the different times we would keep it from relatively short times for things like competition entrance or, for example, an inbound sales form from the web. But because, for example, a lot of the products had lithium-ion batteries, and of course there are things like you do have battery recalls, fortunately not very often, but we would actually keep the customers who have registered products for, I think it was 10 years actually, it was more for a health and safety reason. Anyway, very importantly, you need to segment your data retention policy into basically two categories of reasons. The first is what I call active reasons. Active reasons means your contact has done something actively to enter themselves into the contact database. They have called you, they submitted a form or something like that. The contact has done this themselves. But the legitimate interest is different. I call this a passive reason. Passive is because they did not enter themselves in the database. It's you as marketing have bought a list somewhere and you've put them in the database under legitimate interest. So I call this passive, okay? So remember, you've got active reasons, which is the bulk of things, but you also have passive. In terms of your database size, the majority of your contacts are probably going to be in passive unless you have 100% market share. Does that make sense? If you've got like 5% market share, well then in theory 95% of the people you want to be contacting are going to be in the passive section. So the second step is you create your contact record, and what we did was, this is I call it the marketing life cycle. In marketing, it doesn't matter whether we're consumer or we're business marketers. We start off with suspects who've never heard about our product, service, company, etc. They're suspects. We then drive them through awareness and lead generation to the prospect stage, where they've stuck their hand up and said, I'm interested, but they've not bought yet. We then work with our sales teams in channel to move them to the customer where they've purchased. And then we try and sell them to them again, either a repeat purchase or cross-selling. And that is, I define as retention marketing. Now, we have different databases in the company used for the different things. So we have things like a partner program for our partners. We have Salesforce.com for the sales pipeline. And we have a warranty registration database for our existing customers also that have been purchased through the channel indirect. So we wouldn't see them in Salesforce, for example. What we did is we linked all of those databases into Marketo. So Marketo became the system of record for the contact record. Yep. Now, why would you do it in Marketo? Because you also need to do this for your passive data. Remember the legitimate interest data? You don't want to go putting that in Salesforce, for example, because the sales teams will just go crazy because they won't be able to see their customers for all the contacts that are there. So Marketo, actually, we used the API, we used a custom object. It worked really, really well. We were really happy with it. So now, once you've got your customer record, and by the way, this man is fictitious. It came off the Foreign and Commonwealth Office website. But basically, do you see up there, you've got, he's got a visa. And the visa, it's got an expiry date. Basically, your contact record is going to have an expiry date for both the active data or the active reasons and the passive reasons in your data retention policy. After that date, you have to delete that record. Now, as I said, your contact record is going to have two dates. One for the active reasons that I showed you, and one for the passive reason, which is legitimate interest. It's handled in a different way. And that basically, the reason that you have these two dates is because this one is stronger than this one in terms of keeping it. That's why you separate the two dates, and I'll show you how this works in a minute. So then, what happens is whenever that contact record does something, you go and update that deletion date that I showed you on the passport. So, I have a security camera at home, and when I set it up, you've got these, is everyone familiar with motion detection? So when you set up a security camera, you'll see, like, it's a picture of my driveway actually, and that you can draw on it to say, if there's movement in this zone here, then take a picture and file it on my NAS drive. And it's a similar concept. Within Marketo, what you do is for every single data retention reason, you set up a listening campaign which will fire if that contact record does something in the motion detection area. Does that make sense? Right, so imagine you've got your contact record moving around that room. If they hit any of those red zones, and those, by the way, zones are linked to the data retention reasons, it will fire, and it will then go and update the deletion date on the contact record. So what will happen is that you've got these listening campaigns in Marketo for every data retention reason, and they will fire, and what will happen is that the Marketo listening campaign will say, John Smith, that's his record, because he's just called us, and the data retention policy says we have to keep his record for another 6 years, I go to his current deletion date, and if in 6 years' time it's going to be deleted, don't replace it with this new date. So the new date would be 6 years from today's date when that event happened. Okay? The beauty is you can do this in Marketo, and it's all automatic. So this is an example of what would happen in Marketo. So this was an example for an inbound web form. So you'll say if the form name was this and the contact was this, that you see the attribute change data value, the flow, you've got deletion date. And then the new one is you simply take the system date and time plus the amount of time you want the deletion date to be updated with. And with this example, it was a year, so we put 365 days. Beauty is, it's every single data retention reason that I showed you, we could actually do in Marketo. It was all possible. And then finally, you execute your data purge, could I say. So you basically, what we did is every year we would run a purge, and that anybody who fell outside the data retention policy would then be removed from all systems, Marketo, but also all the other systems. So this is an example of how we would do it. First of all, you identify the contacts outside the data retention policy, and the key is you then check emails and appointments that you have with them. I'll tell you why in a minute. And then you do a final check with sales so you don't piss them off. So first of all, you identify the contacts outside the data retention policy, and what you do is you say, on today's date, does that contact have a deletion date which is behind me, so in other words, yesterday or previous, than today's date? If yes, you delete it, and you basically have a logical OR there. You can see the logic that if this one on the left is blank, and only if it's blank, then the legitimate interest date will take precedence and will fall into the data deletion category. Now, why is email and appointments important? Because it's actually maybe one of the most important reasons to keep your data is that you have an ongoing customer relationship with that contact. Now, we defined an ongoing customer relationship as being, we actually thought, how can we define this in a systematic way that we can enforce with our data retention policy? So we came up with, could we find any emails, meetings, or phone calls logged in Outlook, because we used Office 365 from Microsoft, if we could find any email address of our sales reps with their email linked to the contacts email that we were analyzing, then it would fall into the customer retention record. So what we did is we took what I call the purge file from Marketo. We passed it to our IT department every year, and what we did is we then passed it against Outlook, and they then looked in Outlook to say, were there any emails or appointments or calls recorded in the last 7 years? And then if so, we would update the data deletion date to 7 years in the future, because we could see that they were a customer. But if we couldn't, then we would go to the next stage, which we would pass that, what I call the purge list, which we suspected really was a purge list. We pass it to sales. And what we did is we used the campaign function in Salesforce. We would populate it with the purge file. So we would say to sales once a year, these people are going to be deleted from the system unless you say otherwise. And we gave them 1 month, and they could look at this, and then if they wanted to, they could remove it. Do you see the action remove? And if they didn't remove it after a month, those people were then put in the bin from all systems and removed. So practical considerations that, don't forget, for this to work, you must use Marketo to label data whenever it enters your organization. So remember, inbound web forms, inbound calls, they've entered a promotion, they attended a webinar, all of these things, you must make sure that's registered in Marketo with why they entered the database, okay? But that's fine, it's just like going around your house and saying, this is the window, 1, 2, 3, and making sure they're labeled. Then the other important thing is you must work with your IT department so that they can do this final check against your email system, which allows you to identify if the salespeople have an ongoing commercial relationship that Marketo doesn't see.